I have a story!
In the beginning. No.
In the beginning
of the school day. So we're sitting there getting ready for school. And so my wife had to take Xander first because he had band like before the actual school day. And so helping Henry get ready. And he's playing with this iPod and he's like, Dad, you listen to podcasts, right? And I'm like, yeah, you complain about it on a regular basis. Yes, I do. He's like, oh, well, I started listening.
The kids complain about it?
They do.
Oh, what?
But it's totally great because he goes, well, I started listening to a podcast and I was like, oh, nice. I was like, what are you learning about? And he goes, it's on the psychology of Mr. Beast. And God, now and then he said the name and I was like, oh, is that the guy from is the podcast The Nudge? And he goes, no, that's not it. It's Creator Science. It's Jay Klaus's podcast. And so I tweeted out at Jay, I was like, hey, so my 8-year-old just told me he was listening to your podcast. And then I had to laugh because then my wife came and he went out and got in the car and went to school or whatever. And she had some stuff to do and then came back a couple hours later. And so I was laughing about it. And I was like, yeah, so he said he'd been listening to this podcast. She goes, yeah, he made me put it on the way to school.
That's amazing, dude. That's amazing. And that's my thesis. That like, if you have someone being the tree and setting the example, which you inspire me to do, which I'm not doing in the way I want to, but I'm trying to do in my own way. And I guess I am in my own way, which I should give myself some love for. You had everything covered. Like, you were doing it. You did it publicly. Even though where you're currently sitting, it's sometimes socially fractious or internally fractious, like because it's a loud place to be, or you might have grief with the other half over it. That's my thesis. Like Apple, tree, building public at home, startup family, that these things matter. Like, kids want to win games. And if you can show them someone winning a game in a world that's meaningful to them, and look, it's only meaningful to them because it's the thing they're sort of, it's front and center of their collective kind of zeitgeist. Mr. Beast is front and center of their collective zeitgeist. So it's important to apply the larger perspective and rule to the central principle, which is not necessarily that every kid necessarily has to be a social media influencer, but that it's possible to take the pattern recognition. I think every kid has to create content. I think every adult has to create content. I think content is the new literacy, and there's no existence in this world without it. So I guess, Mr. Beast is as good as an example as anything. But the analysis of the pattern recognition is the meat. When he can get into the psychology of Mr. Beast and why Mr. Beast works, then
it's like, oh, there's a reason. It's not because
he's
naturally a YouTube god. It's like, there's stuff that he's doing that is repeatable.
Yes. And principles behind it, that can then be tested for their capacity to be applied in domains outside that. So it's like, my personal desire is to take things in the education space, and this is what I do in classrooms, and to kind of make that fun, make something that use the principles of what makes Mr. Beast work, or what makes other content on the internet work, I watched a lot of Twitch. So a lot of my communication style, there's a Twitch streamer called Asmongold, who was a streamer on a game called World of Warcraft. And basically a lot of what helped me as a communicator was having that shared cadence. But I love the idea of taking those principles and applying it to interest in real world things, because I like Mr. Beast as a businessman, he's crushing, as a content creator, he's crushing, but I don't think it's a good thing for the world at large if those principles of how to create content, how to create community, how to drive sales off the back of that content community is just restricted to keep your hand on the jet, and the last one to take the hand off the jet gets the jet. Like,
So
I think when
this
it
is
can be
something that
applied,
I'm exploring, because I think what Mr. Beast is doing is he's optimizing for the platform, right? He figures out what YouTube does, and he studied it way more than anybody else. And so his whole thing is, I want stuff that will do really well on YouTube. It's this closed system that has all of these weird rules in place, right? Because the algorithm is this complex thing. And you're trying to kind of get certain people to behave in certain ways. And so one of the things that I'm doing, and it's kind of as part of my analysis of the whole like idea supply chain that I've been talking about for a little bit now, it's I look for people who are optimizing on the idea, not the platform, which is why I'm so adamant about doing things in podcast form and on Twitter and on YouTube, because that helps me focus on the idea itself, not the platform. And so I want an idea that resonates no matter what platform you're on, not content that resonates because of the dynamics of the platform. And sometimes I'll play with that balance, right? There's always a balance of like, how can I take this idea and mold it to a platform?
Can I suggest a podcast for you? I've got to find it. There's a Tim Ferriss podcast where he was being reverse interviewed by a guy called Tim Ferriss. Sorry. He was being reverse, like his podcast host, but he was being interviewed by a friend of his who was asking him questions about podcasting, and he took him through. Here we go. I got it. If only I can give something back. Share. Sorry, I'm a bit slower than you. He was referencing all the. He was talking about all the long form podcast content creators who had, I think you put me onto Paul Millard, like the Pathless Path.
Yes.
They're people who, like, long form podcast content shouldn't do well on YouTube, but if it's the right, I think authenticity is my kind of watchword. Like, one of the reasons I am the way I am in front of kids is I'm trying to be a completely unapologetic, unafraid version of myself. I'm still fucking twitchy with it.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, like, if you don't have the history, but then you do have the history that like makes it even harder. So kudos. You've done an incredible job.
When I try to be me, it feels like this. It's kind of like that. So it's like, I'm going to be me now. Because I had a dream about meteors once, and I was saying, the meme of like people together on a beach, like the world's about to end and they're watching the meteors rain from the sky. And in this dream, I essentially said it hurts more if you don't see them coming. And basically I was referring to that, like you tense up before you get hit. Because sometimes as a kid, I would just say something and a hand would fly. And the things, because he was drunk a lot, the hands could fly kind of at socially, like moments that didn't make sense. Like it didn't need to be, hey dad, fuck you. It could just be like, blah. So it's hard, and I guess it's hard for kids, but my point where content was concerned is I think that authentic content, like the content that you're really meant to make, is built off the back of the person that you really are. And that's the real blue ocean. That's the market of that's the real blue ocean. The you being you, because no one's story is the same as yours. And that's why, yeah, you've done a great thing, because there's some tomatoes outside. You know, a little bit of grow in public. Sounds illegal. Sounds like the government's going to shut me down. I'm growing in public.
Okay, just growing tomatoes.
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 Tomatoes. But there is that little bit of like, hang on, right here. Grow in public, bitches. Dude, you fix me every single weekend. You fix me, man. Like,
that's what I'm here for.
I love you, dude, because you bring me back.
But you're not broken.
Yeah, I try. You
No,
bring me
you're
back
not
to
broken.
a point. You bring me back to a point of I will not deflect that. I accept that. I'm going to try to internalize that the best I can. I love it when doing is always the answer. Just do something that's a little easier, a little less threatening. But doing is always the answer. And when so much of how we set up the world of, like, I swear, I know, I bet my nuts on this. I bet my dick on this. Build in public for kids and change the fucking world. Build in public early, authenticity early, creating early, truth early, personal truth early, above all, to thine own self be true. Creation, because the thing that bothers me, like I heard an interview on the All In podcast with Mr. Beast. By the way, check out the Tim Ferriss one, because essentially he talks about the people who managed to have extreme success with kind of anti-algorithm content, because the authenticity of Joe Rogan found the people who were meant to, you know, have you heard, there's a book by Seth Godin called Purple Cow?
Yes.
It's amazing, but also I think that it's something that is beaten out of children as a kid, like an institution which is inherently normalizing, culturally normalizing, basically. Like, honestly, you'd be better punching your kids in the face. Because if that gets taken out of them, that is the most valuable source of intellectual property, capital, monetary value, network connection they're ever going to have. And school does it at scale to every kid everywhere. And I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, because if somebody shares this on the internet and goes, hey, this guy's employer, he thinks this, they will kill me, man. They will kill me. But fuck it.
Good news is nobody watches stuff on this channel.
You know, tomatoes. 1 and 2. Sometimes one is bigger than the other.
That, because that's
sometimes one is bigger than the other. Hang on. Sometimes it's okay to be different. Some are different, some are normal. It's okay. It's okay. There's no shame. I've been watching a lot of sex education on Netflix. Check it out. Sex education on Netflix. There is a beautiful love story between a beautiful, sensitive English boy who reminds me a little bit of myself. And it's nice to see the slightly tortured and neurotic and overthinking anxious kid win. I'm like, yeah, go boy, yeah. Look at it, man. Like, seriously, sex education on Netflix, but also just be normal about human sexuality. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm ranting too much. You made me too
No,
happy.
all
It's
good.
your fucking fault, man. Fuck Leo Guinan. Made me happy. Fuck that guy.
Clipping that right there.
Fucking guy. Fucking guy. Fucking Leo Guinan made me happy, bitch.
So that's actually something that I tried to embrace in the video that I put out today. So when you're talking about, like, being unique and kind of like anti-algorithm, so I kind of reached back into the past and pulled out an analogy that will appeal to probably this much of the internet. So basically I was like, how is content creating a bit like goose hunting? And so the whole premise was based off of something that my dad said to me
How
when
is
I was
content
growing up.
creation? Say that one more time. How is content creation?
How is content creation like goose hunting?
Okay.
And so it stems back to this idea that, like, there's something that my dad said that has stuck with me all these years. And so, in goose hunting, part of that is decoys, right? You buy decoys and you set them up in the field and you do all of these things. And there are a million types of decoys out there. And so I remember, like, being in the
Sorry, I
sporting
was
goods
doing a call.
store.
I was doing a
It's
call.
not bad. But yeah, so we're in Cabela's and we're looking at decoys. And my dad, like, looked over to me and he said, just remember, he's like, decoys don't actually have to attract geese. Decoys have to attract hunters. And I was like,
That's interesting.
that's such a goddamn profound statement.
Yeah.
Because, like, you think about, like, the whole hunting experience, like, and I really, like, kind of got into it because, like, it's a long season and there's a big difference between, like, early season hunting and late season hunting, because in early season the geese are dumb, right? They don't know anything. They're just flying wherever. They'll fly into your decoys. And that's fine. And so as you get later in the season, the geese get smarter. They're like, oh shit, every time we fly over that field, we lose some friends.
Even
Maybe
geese have pattern recognition. Geese can make good content with good pattern recognition. Geese get it, man.
And so I actually was kind of thinking of, like, oh, well, on the early stages of, like, a new social media platform, it's easy to attract geese in because people are naive and they're excited to be on a new platform and their guard is down. But then as you start to get into later stages of social media and people keep shooting their shots at you in your DMs, and most of them are bad and just firing at whatever. And I think one of the analogies I made was like, and unfortunately, a lot of people just think that the solution when the geese are super far away is that you need a bigger gun and a faster, like, firing rate. Like, I'm like, no, that's not it. Like, the trick is you need to be more subtle. You need to draw them in. You need to understand more about them. And like, so in the late season of hunting, it really comes down to, like, who the best hunters are, because they're the ones who understand the patterns of the geese. They understand, like, the need for different techniques in different fields. They adapt to the new ecosystem. Now, I kind of liken it to, like, people selling courses online, right? Like, they're trying to just blast out their course to everybody and anybody because numbers go up is good. But in the end, like, you can have as many decoys as you want and they can be as fancy as you want, but if you're sitting in the wrong field and there's no geese showing up, like, you're not going to be successful. Like, there's more than decoys out there, right? But so many people are just selling the decoys because that's easy to sell. You can claim anything you want about these decoys. They're magic decoys. They attract all the geese. Great. But if you do the rest of it wrong, it doesn't matter how good the fucking decoys are. Like, there's way more to it than that. And some people just like to go out on the weekends and blast it, whatever, and they don't care what effects they have on all the other hunters in the area, like spooking geese, and they'll take low percentage shots. Whereas, like, the people who take it seriously, like, they understand that, you know, if you're gonna shoot, like, you want to have a chance of hitting your target, because every shot you take could potentially affect how this flock is going to treat things in the future. And so, like, taking, just blasting out shots with no real chance of getting anything is just wasting your opportunity down the line. And so, yeah, I have this great YouTube video on it that, as I said, nobody will probably see. I also had a Twitter thread that nobody saw, because Twitter really fucking hates me right now.
Really? Why do you think
Oh,
that's the case?
I mean, my average, like, impressions on a tweet is less than 100, and I have like 2,000 followers. And I try not to get too caught up.
Can I hit you with a piece of content? I haven't executed on it, to my shame, but the third video I think is the right mindset, just with everything to take. In the first one, the first of the three, Tim Ferriss talks about the extent to which he actually optimized most of his distribution for like email, because he wanted his distribution to be like on a platform that he could control, because he was talking to someone in the I think e-commerce space, and the guy was talking about Facebook and essentially saying it's like it's great until it's not. Like, you find something that's working great, they change the algorithm, then you got a problem. But the second thing is the Mr. Beast thing at the All In Summit, and he does get into the granular bits and pieces about like his process, but also people copying him. Like, people hate Mr. Beast now because, like, Mr. Beast ruined YouTube. That was kind of the joke. But the third one is like the one is greater than zero, and essentially he was talking about, it was like an argument for really patient incrementalism. So it's like, if you get one person to hear your stuff, and I can say, as somebody who's listened to you, I talk to people about you all the time. I talk to random kids about you. That's a win. And it's that win at scale over time that builds into something big. Whereas when you get stuck in the weeds on what Twitter's doing, whatever Twitter's doing.
Right. I can't control that.
Yeah. Whereas you have a message. Your message aligns with your own practice. Your message aligns. Like, I wanted to get my kids listening to podcasts. I'm about that life. I haven't managed to do that. I should expose them to it more, and I'm going to. But when you have those things aligned, like your own practice, own life, own culture is aligned with your message, and the message is based on fun and service and contribution, rather than any expectation of immediate financial upside. So you're ticking all the boxes for long-term brand creation, all the boxes for long-term community building. So patience, Kimosabi, because you're doing it. You're doing what I'm not doing. You're doing it. And you're doing it with all the other stuff that I know about that's hanging over your head, which means you have massive fucking balls. Massive. Well, I remember index cards at the library. I remember having to search for things on index cards. The interwebs. But I think his argument is right, because I think that doing is the purest and happiest form of being.
Read your book in bed.
So I think let the platforms do what they're going to do, and you just do what you're going to do. But in the first one, Tim Ferriss, I think he specifically talks about email. But my understanding of distribution isn't sophisticated enough to really explain it elegantly. But
I'll give you
I think everyone who has the kind of success that I personally want to have does what they want to do and keeps doing it until people like it. Like, oh God, that's probably an over exaggeration, but they get an incremental, tick, tick, tick over time. I guess if it's there is other Gary Vee content when he gets like a negative, he's talking to someone and someone's not doing well, and he's talking about the decision on when to change, when to pivot. The only thing I would say where pivoting is concerned is where creator culture is concerned. I see that as like, have you read the book Blue Ocean Strategy?
We were talking about it. I actually haven't read the book, but I am familiar with that strategy.
You're familiar with the concept. I think that when you're doing creator culture stuff, but you're doing it in a creator culture space that already has established players and a lot of established players, I think it's harder to stand out than if you are telling the story about your son listening to the Mr. Beast podcast, because I think every parent implicitly knows that education isn't working and there needs to be a new on-ramp to something that does work. And I think even though it's an imperfect measure, views, brand building, community building, bank balance building, it's all a free, at scale way of teaching kids what works. Because creator culture podcasts aren't interested in, like, they're talking about what works. They're talking about what real people are doing right now. So the currency of the information is important too. But if you work in that space, you're giving a message to people just like you who are professionals, have kids, and they understand the pressures on you as a professional. Like, oh, I'm a programmer. Well, AI, not just Copilot, but like, my understanding is that not just AI copilots, but actual natural language prompts. Somebody, oh God, I can't remember the guy's name. He's one of the heads of one of the LLM models. I think it was the second one, and I think his name is Mustafa. And he was saying, like, coding won't exist in 5 years because AI will take it over altogether. So
yeah, that's one of those. I have trouble with like all of those statements because so I don't think it's not all just about the code you write, right? Like, in fact, the majority of my days are not spent actually writing code.
fucking bitches. No, sorry, I thought it was.
I mean, that's good. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's not like I just sit there and type on my laptop for like 10 hours a day. Like, no, like most of it's spent thinking, because it's not just about the code you produce. It's about like, oh, what does the user actually want? How does the user experience this flow? And of course, there's a lot that goes into it, right? There's design, and then there's product management, which says like, hey, this is what users want. But being in a startup, like, a lot of that is fluid, and one of the things that we kind of hear on a pretty regular basis is like, you need to think about all of these things. Like, you need to be able to work without all of the constraints and understand that, like, oh, if you don't have design, like, do something that looks nice anyway, like,
yeah,
things like that, right? Like, so you want to be able to kind of understand all aspects of it. And so
You've proven that, because I've seen that when you've gone to use Midjourney or whatever, it hasn't just been about, well, press the button and it just works. You needed to put some thought into the prompts. You've needed to put some thought into, what you're trying to create, and test and sort of iterate on how certain prompts lead to certain outcomes.
You actually
Yeah.
have to understand like the whole process, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, great, everybody can code. Now, what do you build? And actually, I had a thread on Twitter again that was seen by nobody, but I thought it was pretty funny. So I don't know if you saw, like, Tony
it's
Dean.
evergreen content. It will be there forever.
Right. Well, Twitter, we'll see.
Retweet
Elon's
it.
trying
Just-
to think. It's there. I'll probably, what I do with a lot of that is I'll take the ideas and like repackage them periodically instead of like saying the same thing.
But I've seen
Which-
some people who seem to have their tweets or like old tweets just on a timed retweet, like once a week,
I've
once
got
a day.
some of those like that go. Honestly, I don't spend a lot of time. Like, part of my problem is like a lot of the stuff I do isn't fully evergreen, in the sense that
Build in
I
public.
tweet about my understanding at that time,
Yeah,
but it's a very dynamic process because like I'm constantly reevaluating, and so I'm saying a lot of the same things just in different ways to kind of see what
I
resonates.
see how that would be the case. I see how that would be the case.
And so, but yeah, so I saw this thing where do you know Tony Dean? He does
No.
like some indie hacking. He was the one who built Black Magic, which got bought by Hype Fury. And he's got
Just
like
looking him up now.
So let me see if I can find. So basically, he wrote a blog post just like talking about his story, and then he posted it on Hacker News. And Hacker News, of course, had all sorts of thoughts, most of which were really fucking stupid.
Tony Dean.
Here,
So I haven't got the right link.
That's the story
Oh,
that like it went super viral.
Oh, he's Vietnamese.
Yeah, that's, I realized that if you don't know Tony Dean, you may not know that, and so spelling his last name would probably be tricky anyway. But yeah, so it went super viral, and a bunch of people were like, "Oh, well, like you built that stuff, that's great. Like I could totally build that in a weekend, whatever." And so I started thinking about that, and I'm like, you know what? I was like, every single software engineer, anyone who knows how to code, is a potential billionaire, because they can build anything. Like, given enough time, you can build anything, right? Like, you have the ability to code anything. And so there's an infinite number of things that you can code. Of those things, a non-zero number of them will be valuable. Some of those will be extremely valuable. And therefore, if you sum up all of those potential values, you have an infinite amount of money. So you'll be actually above a billionaire. Now, the problem is when you actually start working on something, you start cutting down those possibilities. And so people don't ever start, because it's a lot easier to say, oh, I could build that in a weekend, and then never actually do anything about it, because that limits your actual potential earnings. And, you know, as someone who has gone through the pain of all of this and going, oh, like, I know how to write code, I can do all of this stuff. It's like, yeah, actually, but knowing what to write is way harder. And that's exactly what I was kind of talking about with, like, it's not about just sitting there writing code. There's so much of it is like knowing what to write. Like, it's like everybody who knows how to write words is a potential best-selling author. They can write an infinite number of word combinations, and one of those is a New York Times bestseller. Which one? Well, I don't know.
People aren't prepared to get those at bats. People aren't prepared to get rid of the bad ideas.
But
to like live the bad ideas, to create the bad ideas.
I use AI to cycle through ideas as fast as possible. How many things can I go through and just all I want to do is increase the speed of idea to something. And
Iteration.
that's the whole idea with like the idea supply chain. Everything starts with an idea because the idea is what sparks everything in the future from that. And so you take it from idea to something in reality as soon as possible, throw it out, see what happens, do it again. And that's why I do all sorts of shit, and I will throw stuff at the wall. And like I started building a podcast app this week for a couple different reasons. And then I've got my AI co-founder, which somebody's actually using and is like, wow, this is actually really good and helpful. And I've been using it, and I think it is too. And I gave it memory now, which is great because it learns.
That's amazing.
It is actually pretty cool. So, because I have a thing where like basically you tell it about your business, and like that's part of it. But like one of the things I realized is I was like, oh, well, the problem is like I give it something, and if I'm in the conversation and like we're talking about something, it remembers it fine because it's like in the context of that conversation. But then you go to the next conversation and it doesn't have that memory of it. And so I basically gave it the idea of like, hey, here are all of the questions you have about the business, and here's what you know about the business. And so every message that it gets, it after it responds, it goes back through and it says, oh, based on this knowledge, which of these questions can I remove? Do I need to add any questions? And then rewrite what I know about the business. And so the understanding of the business is evolving over time based on that. And that's actually going to be the basis, I think, for a lot of like cool shit that I can do. Because now that I've seen that it works actually remarkably well.
Can I suggest something? One thing is that, yeah, thank you for linking that. I need that. The other thing I was going to say was so much of what you were saying sounded so prescient or relevant in the world of kids. Because what do kids have? They have an idea. They like to pursue ideas. They what's the major why don't they pursue ideas? Acceptance, vulnerability to censure, vulnerability to getting in trouble. What would be a really low friction way to pursue an idea in a way that almost Tony Stark making Spider-Man's new suit allows them to almost virtually iterate or prototype that idea in real time and then go, oh, okay, what do I think of that? So basically everything you said, but just 20 years earlier, before people, like that's naturally what kids do. So before they get it beaten out of them.
Here's going to be the actual test. So if you remember last week, I was talking about Yeti hats. And so we
are going to Yeti Hat Stadium.
That's right. We're going to Yeti Hat Stadium.
Harland is a Yeti.
So we now have a Shopify store set up.
Oh, shut up. Seriously?
I got the link. Yeah, we've got an actual website. Yeti-hat.com. And also if you click like the whyYetiHat.com, my tagline is because a dad joke needs its own store.
Oh, that's hilarious. Now that's the Spotify store?
Shopify.
So you just made that on Shopify.
So yeah, it's Shopify, and then it uses print on demand from Printify. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to get this set up, and then I'm going to let Henry play with it. And I'm going to give Henry an AI co-founder to help him talk through it. And it's like, if I can turn my 8-year-old into a successful entrepreneur with nothing more than a Shopify store and a chatbot, sky's the limit. Like
that's his first job, not a job. The first place he earns income is his little side hustle.
Yeah.
I think that's incredible. I think that's important. I support it wholeheartedly. Where the podcast app is concerned, I would selfishly like it to be sort of like incredibly customizable. It's almost like one playlist. Like the only thing you care about is the thing you're going to listen to next. And the thing, like, you might take suggestions from people close to you. So it's essentially like, and designate permissions. So it's like, I will listen to anything Leo tells me to listen to. So I allow Leo to put stuff into my list. The list immediately recognizes how far along you are with everyone that you're onto. And from a UI perspective, sure, there's other content in another page, but there's one page where it's just like, this is just you, no one but you, just for you, nice and clear, nice and clean. It's just like, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? And then connecting to like, I'm probably loading you down with feature bloat now, but connecting to a notes app. So the capacity to kind of go,
I think I see where you're going, and this is the one feature. There's one thing that I want for my podcast app, and I got the notice that Google Podcast is shutting down, and that's the one I use because the rest of them are buggy, and Google Podcast has always been good enough. But there's one thing I've always wanted to do. When I hear something I like, I want to just go clip that and have it grab the last thought.
Yeah.
And so that is the one feature I'm going to implement first. So I actually have a thing where I can play a podcast and click clip, and it sends a request to a backend. Doesn't do anything except send it information with the timestamp. So it sends a timestamp. Because the magic of it is by doing the transcription, you get timestamps, and you can use like language models to figure out how much of the context you need. And the amount of value of which pieces of a podcast get clipped is incredibly valuable information to the podcaster.
Ooh, almost like a
Not
heat
to
map
mention,
where their
you could
content
also
hit
take
and where it didn't.
clips and throw them into like a TikTok style feed to where you can discover new content super fast by listening to like profound clips and going, I want to listen to that whole episode. And so there's a lot of really cool stuff that can go from there. But basically, I just want to be able to go like clip it and then have it actually send me the clip, and I want to be able to contain the clip and also potentially the transcript, and maybe even like email it to myself like the next day or like some duration after, right? Like it doesn't have to be right this second. I just want to keep track of it because I listen to all this stuff, and this is not a podcast app for people who casually listen to podcasts. This is for people like me who are sitting there with podcasts in their ear all damn day, every day, going, oh, clip it, clip it, clip it. That's what we do.
Can I suggest,
clip it.
can I selfishly suggest something as well, which is going to be feature bloat as well, but
Let's bloat it up.
the
I don't have a product
capacity,
manager there,
like selfishly, I have everything you've ever linked me up on tabs, and it's an inefficient way to get what I need to get to my head. A lot of the learning sources I have are disparate. So it's like, yes, podcast, but yes, YouTube, but yes, this. And even if you just had like an audio feed of a video channel, which would be enough, I think it's probably not practical, features wise, but the capacity to have everything I need to learn from disparate sources in one place, and I have one button anytime I want to learn. It's just all there, because I personally find that when you take my executive processing issues into account as well, like I got a lot done yesterday, but a lot of what I was doing was like dealing with stuff I hadn't dealt with. So not really the growth related stuff, but the like neglected maintenance issue stuff. Like, so when I go to learn, if it's one button in one place, it's so much more statistically likely to be successful than when it's 7 buttons in 7 places. Because the 7 buttons in 7 places are around 77 other buttons that do 777 other things. So
It's because
yeah.
everybody has a button that they want you to use that gives them insights into your behavior so that they can figure out. But again, this all goes back to this idea of optimizing for the platform, not the idea. Everything
want
I
my
do
button for me.
optimizes for the idea.
I want the button that cares about me, the button that knows what I want to learn and knows that I want to choose what I want to learn. And I'm happy with some people giving suggestions, but I'm also happy with some people going, no, listen to this. And I will consume that sight unseen. But if it could just be one giant funnel into my face from all these different sources, then it selfishly works better for me because I can always be on my phone, but I can only periodically be on my computer. I guess the smart way would be for me just to like copy and paste a link of everything to Google Keep or something. But those are the features I'd selfishly like.
And then it's all these extra steps that you shouldn't need to go through. And that's the part that annoys me. By the way, if you want to see what the super early version of a podcast player that looks like that can do that sort of thing looks like, it's right there in the chat.
Clip. And you taught me about
and if you look, there's a timestamp in the middle that when you push play, it'll tell you like how far along you are in the episode.
Oddly enough, like it sounds like a joke, but to people, like if I go into a room as a teacher and there's shit everywhere, perceptually it's so difficult for me. I'm anxious the whole day and really have to concentrate not to lose everything I own. So I oddly love that. Not just because it's correct design in the sense that and I get the impression that when you first design something, you just make the function and you don't worry about UI at that point. You don't worry about having a whole UI. You just have a UI that embodies that one function that you're trying to, sell or prove.
In the parlance of build space, you build a toy.
Yeah.
It's a toy. It doesn't have to be like anything fancy. Like step one is like you build a toy. And then you see if people want to play with your toy.
And that disconnect.
I don't know.
That disconnect between what is actually what you should build and the way we wind kids up as kids. So kids aren't just like, I'm writing. And I'll get better at writing by writing. And if I write something and it's not perfect, that's fine. For them, it's almost like it's life and death shit. It's like, if I am wrong, I am bad. So I'm not bad, it better be good. And so it's good, I better show everything I can do. And it better be right by the time I show it to somebody important, because if it's not right, I'm bad. I think it's hardly surprising that no one wants to do anything. I think it's hardly surprising that the human race wants to hide and look at a screen. So so much of what you're saying is really important. And insofar as this content is concerned, since I don't seem to be, incredibly great at follow through on my end of releasing everything, I honestly think that given the topics we cover technology, but we also cover there's a lot of people who know they need to start businesses and are in my position. It's like, I'm a piece of shit. What? Huh? Yeah, I can do it. So that's a very real sort of constituency that's out there, and they know that their kids are playing a losing game. So, I think that as a built-in public test, and on a different channel with a different identity, release, and I guess technically, I guess the content is so long and we've done so many of them that no one would be interested enough to go in and pick out what's going to lose me my job. But as a human being trying to be authentic, I'm not ashamed of anything I did or said. because it's the most clear and complete. You know, it is fun to be silly.
One of the things that I realized is I want to get to a place where nobody else can take anything away from me, right? Like I want to be fully in control of my destiny to the point where
That's
like
fucking huge.
I can't be fired, I can't be like whatever. Because at that point,
Unless
I
you're
can-
Steve Jobs. Too early.
well, he was a visionary. It's okay to be early.
Visionary. Vision is scary.
That's right. Now we're gonna lay down some freestyle in here. But yeah, like you like I wanted to have control over that to the point where like, and I don't want to say it this way necessarily, but essentially I want to be uncancelable, right? Like I don't want anybody to have control over my outcomes.
Seconded.
And that means
Seconded.
that I have to understand a lot of how things work, because the reality is that it's complicated to do that because a lot of people like having control over other people. And then
listen, the Tim Ferriss one at the top, when he kind of talks about not needing other people's distribution channel because he just had a shit ton of email. I don't
so
know.
email's good, except for the fact that it's running into a similar issue, and that is like the flooding of the medium. And so everybody has an email list and everybody is trying to get you to subscribe. And so what happens? Your email box ends up flooded. And then how many of the emails do you read? Not nearly as many as you would if you actually had a lot more choice.
No, that's real. That's real. That's super real.
And that's something that like I've been struggling with too, because it's like I love the feeling behind owning your email list, but everybody's doing that, and when everybody does it, the geese get scared. It all goes back to that idea, right? Everybody's shooting their shot in my email box, and
seriously,
I'm the goose that's like, fuck this field.
I'm not going to be happy with the Yeti hat until there's like a built-in public parrot and the sausage one. I don't remember the. I think that execution is correct, and I think the idea of them. I don't know if you could get built-in public parrot built on consignment, but
I don't know. I'll figure out something. I have a store. Once I have a store, then it's like I could put whatever I want in there. I got to figure out how to get the stuff, but like, set up the store.
So
there's one product in there right now. Like I've got a couple other things.
But I think that's one of the reasons that I'm useful, because I think you knowing stuff is a huge deal. And I think my capacity to say stupid shit is a good way to help that important message kind of cut through. Because in my experience as a communicator, particularly with kids, but same as with adults, like we live in a culturally intoxicating, high stimulation kind of world. So I think that there's a way sometimes to grab two cherry tomatoes, lift them up to a camera screen, make jokes about balls, and then talk about creator culture and the reimagination of the global internet. Because the emotional, I think people react to difference in content. I think people react to difference in any form of communication. So when I'm in a room and I'm like there's a performance aspect to it, is what I'm saying. Like it's intentional. Like I'm not just fundamentally inclined to say ridiculous, obscene shit. I do it for a reason. Like I think when messages are important, but not necessarily sexy. Like some things aren't sexy at the start, and so many people are so emotionally addicted to that need for anything they do to be a little bit sexy that they can't get to the point where it actually starts feeling like a win. I'm gonna spruik you a neti hat, not Yeti hat. Yeti hat. Here we go.
I do love it because I posted a short on YouTube that was like it was just kind of me walking down the street and I said, so am I the type of dad that will buy a domain and start an e-commerce store just to take a dad joke like way too far? Huh. Yeah, turns out I am that kind of dad. And that was like the entire video, and it's already up to like 1.2 thousand views. People are asking about it. Up like you need to post a follow-up. And I'm like, that is actually the plan, because then it's like send traffic to yetihat.com. But yeah, the podcast in there. So Jordan Harbinger interviewed somebody. Well, it was more of a discussion than an interview, which I actually really liked about it. But it was talking about the scarcity brain, and how our brains are wired for like picking up on like potential scarcity of resources, and like it really ties into the way we consume information, because we essentially are like, I need all the information I can get because there might be a point when I don't have any information. And a stat that came out of that like blew my fucking mind was that the average person today consumes more information in a day than the average person 700 years ago did in their lifetime.
Yeah.
That is a lot of fucking information. Then you're like, oh, no wonder human brains are just like shutting down and going, oh, video game.
So I think content divides us at the moment because we're looking at different screens in different rooms. But if we had a sense of, it's a pathway almost to find out who the people in your life are based on what they watch, based on what they like. And I think it's lazy for me to assume that everything everyone in my life is watching is complete shit and only I have it down. But dude, we are out of time. You're incredibly handsome and good looking and funny and cool, and you made me happy, and I appreciate you.
Likewise.